So, I'm a data geek, and I used to start all my speeches by telling stories and regaling and just how geeky I am about data. But I have a marketing manager that usually follows me around, and she's been telling me, you don't have to actually tell the stories proving that you're a data geek, because your speech actually does, in fact, prove it. So just tell your stories. And what I'm going to do in the limited time that I had, I asked Rebecca for like 4 hours, and she said, no, like 30 minutes is all you can have. I'm going to tell you stories around 3 main points that I want to make. And the first point is that when we talk about big data, what we're really talking about is observed behavior and the value of observed behavior. So I'll tell you about my stories there. Then I'm going to talk to you about inefficiencies. Inefficiencies in the marketplace and how big data can actually reveal what those inefficiencies are and help you capitalize on them. And finally, the third point is that in our world right now, specifically with PR, we're facing disintermediation of so many things. That term that we used to use in the 2000s before the dot-com boom, the first one. We're seeing disintermediation of the media. It's a tough word to say. And I'm going to talk about that and some of my stories there and how AirPR actually fits into all of this. So, data. Let me tell you a little bit about my life. Have the last 10 years, I've been analyzing a sample of 10 million internet users and what they do every single day. This is what I do day in, day out. So, about 1 million different websites. I can look at how those 10 million people interact with 1 million websites. I get between 5 to 8 million search terms to analyze every single week. And I live in this data. I look for stories. I started this 10 years ago. And I was hired to do tactical things with this data, help clients, which are mostly Fortune 5,000 companies, Fortune 1,000 companies, help them find these little inefficiencies, find ways to market their products better. But I found myself just getting lost in this data and finding these really cool stories. One of the things I started to do with search terms, for example, is I would look through search terms and I would filter all these millions of terms with terms that contain why. Like, what questions are people asking Google? So you put in why. Number one, actually this morning I checked it out to see what's happening today. The number one search term was why. Why am I broke? I found this kind of troubling. I mean, this is a pretty simple mathematical equation. You got money out, you got money in, yet people are going to Google and searching, why am I broke? Where is one of my favorites. Of course, right now, this week, where is Syria is the number one in search terms, and where is still, after all this time. Usually it's what I call the stands. It's Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. People are always searching on the stands. A kind of funny story around where is. March, 2 years ago, we were looking at where is, and you had all the stands, and then you had where is my liver? Showed up number 9. What the heck is that? I kind of just wrote it off after a while, some anomaly with the data. Maybe a celebrity diagnosis, we didn't know. Next March, where's my liver? And so now I've got a pattern going. And 2 for me is a pattern. So we started analyzing and looking where people are going. And from this search, we actually can follow the most popular websites visited from where's my liver. And what we discovered, what we think, our hypothesis is it's actually kids, college students mostly, spring break, out drinking. They come home that night, they get a little pain right about here, and they're actually going to Google and typing, where's my liver? And it dies right after spring break. Every year. Happened again this year, where's my liver? These are the things that we look for. So I'm doing this for my company, and I start to kind of relax on the tactical stuff, and I'm just doing this bizarre stuff, like what's crazy about our population. And at one point, our CEO said, great that you're doing this stuff. Love that you're here. Maybe you could do some stuff that people could make money on. That would be great. So they gave me a project. We want to know what people search for in terms of products. So we have all these retailers. Just about every major retailer is a client of my company, which is now Experiment. So go and study what people are searching for. So I just offloaded that to one of my analysts because I want to go back to looking at why and where and how and those questions. So my analyst, I gave her, I think, 150, 200,000 terms. And I said, here, take this, and then come back and tell me what people are searching for. You got that long tail in those terms, so she had to manually go through them and figure out what's the most popular thing. So she came back after about a month, and she said, there's something really strange. The thing that was most searched on in the period of time you gave me data was prom dresses. And this is why I became obsessed with prom dresses, and it's known for my obsession with prom dresses. She said, the weird thing, though, is that the data set you gave me was for the first week of January. That's strange. I mean, I'm a guy, I know prom's in May, and I'm guessing that March is probably the right time for marketing prom dresses. So why in the world are consumers searching prom dresses in January, first week of January? So we call some of our clients, the retailers that are our clients, and we ask them, what's with prom dresses? When do you market them? March. When do you buy search terms? March. When do you put up the creative on your website around prom dresses? March. We showed them the data. Something's wrong with your data. That's not how consumers act. So at this point, we go back to the data. We're doing all sorts of analysis. Maybe there's some sort of bot out there that's creating prom dress searches. We don't know. And I become obsessed with it. I start putting this chart in every presentation I give. So I'm giving these keynotes to the travel industry. Hey, there's a search term chart on prom dresses. Does anyone know what this is about? No? Okay, we move to the next chart. I start doing this for about a year, and at one presentation, it's in New York, and it's a Online Publishers Association meeting. I put the prom dress chart up. And at the end of the meeting, this guy comes up to me, very distinguished older gentleman, and he says, son, I'm all about prom dresses. This is strange. So you know, what you've shown here in this chart is you've actually proved what we've been doing in the publishing industry has actually worked. I looked at his card. It was the GM of Hertz publication teen division. So you know, our advertising season for prom dresses is March to May, as you'd expect, but that's where we make all of our money. So we actually wanted to lengthen that season so that we can make more money. So the way we did that is we came up with these fashion editions around prom in January, and we've been pushing them really hard. And for the first time ever, you're actually showing us that our strategy worked. We've got girls searching for prom dress fashions in January. Cool thing is that there's this huge inefficiency in the marketplace. All these consumers searching for content, and other than the magazines, the design labels, the retailers had no search terms bought for those terms, and we're not getting any of the traffic. So massive inefficiency. And that's what it's really about when we look at observed behavior, at least from my perspective, is finding those inefficiencies in the data set. So we use that as our first tool to kind of find some monetizable things that we could do with our data. But I was trying to do some more predictive things. So I actually determined that I could predict reality television show results based on search term data. Certain ones, Dancing with the Stars, American Idol, British Pop Idol, Strictly Come Dancing. There's it's just sort of an exercise that I undertook just to show how much wealth there is in this data, that you could look at how people search and then look at real life, and then actually those searches are real life. You could impute what's going to happen in a future event based on how people were acting. The other thing that was really, really valuable about looking at observed behavior, search term data, visits to websites, is that the other tools that we used to use as market researchers were primarily surveys, studies. And what I've always known, and most researchers will tell you, is that people will tell you what they do and how they act, what they believe some of the times. But a good portion of the times, they won't. So I titled the first chapter of my first book, PPC. But for me, PPC wasn't paid per click, it's porn, pills, and casinos. I found that if you went to that area of the internet and you compared survey data to observed behavior, very different. So I had a way of demonstrating this. I've given keynotes to about like 27,000 people at this point for book number 1, and I've asked a question of every audience I've been in front of. The question is this: by show of hands, how many people regularly visit adult entertainment or porn websites? Only one guy has raised his hand out of 27,000 people, and it was the sound guy. Hit it about 3 years ago. Our data, our observed behavior, tells us that 16% of all visits to the internet are going to porn sites. That's actually the stat when the book came out in 2008. Currently, it's at about 10%. And we're seeing this interesting phenomenon. Social media has actually been cannibalizing visits to porn sites, even though there's been this explosion of free porn. I've been doing some guerrilla market research, actually turning back to surveys to try and figure out what's happening there. The only hypothesis I have, which I haven't been able to prove, is that social media, according to some guys, is taking up too much time. It's actually cannibalizing time, and it's a time factor thing. I don't know. That actually, when the book came out, that was what everyone wanted to talk about, was the PPC chapter. So I did a segment with 2020, and we were in the studio for like an hour and a half with Elizabeth Vargas, and they narrowed it down, 8 minutes of that hour and a half, to all about porn. So, true story, I love telling stories. I didn't know what they were going to air, had no idea. I thought it was going to be some of my other great examples in data, because there's another 12 chapters of the book. Porn, Pills, and Casinos was just chapter number 1. We're sitting there watching the show. I know that the CEO of my company is watching the show. My family's watching the show. There's a bridge jumping segment before mine. Okay, I can deal with that. Golden Gate Bridge. Then they show the bump to commercial for my segment. And it's a black screen, and then you see smoke. And then you see a woman's figure, kind of in silhouette, and then you hear porn music in the background. And the voiceover says, Bill Tancer knows what you're really doing. Oh no. My wife says, I don't remember this. My wife says I literally crawled underneath the coffee table when that came on. I do remember my niece calling me though afterwards. She was 9 at the time. And she called after having seen this segment. She said, Uncle Billy, you did a really good job, but it was a little bit inappropriate. So there's an example of how observed behavior is so powerful. Inefficiencies in the marketplace, they're definitely there. If you talk to people about PR, and I'm fascinated with just about everything, and I talk to my own PR folks, and we have a lot of them, and I've been through so many different PR firms and internal PR folks that we've worked with, and when you ask them how they do what they do, a lot of it comes back to art. There's an art to this. And I gotta tell you, I've worked with some like Picassos of PR, but I've also worked with like the Black Velvet Elvis paintings of PR. There's a wide gamut, and there is an art. But I believe that even from the Picasso all the way down to that lower end, you can improve what you do when you have access to data, when you can start to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Now, the third point is that we're facing a very fluid time in terms of media, how people consume, the explosion of social media. There's been so much written about that. I can tell you from just our own study of how people consume media, we find that there is just this huge variance. The way I analyze our data, I divide the US population into 79 segments of like behavior. It's very broad. It's not as granular as I'd like, but it's a start. So I can take segments like kids in Cabernets, these affluent couples with kids in affluent suburbs. I can study how they look at media. I can go down to urban, the urban jet set, another affluent segment of just couples. I can look at some lower income segments. And I find that they all consume media in very different ways. But I also find that it's changing constantly. I can look at the data one week and go back a few weeks later and it's completely different. And I imagine how hard it must be in PR to understand how people consume media and what's the best way to get that message out there. I've got a great story about this. So back in 2009, I was looking at Hulu.com and they're about to launch. In our data, I could actually go to Hulu.com and I can study their demographics. So before launch, 18 to 24-year-old male, key demographic. They launch, it goes 55 plus. In fact, I think it's 60% of visitors to Hulu were 55 plus after the launch. Completely blew me away. Like, that can't be. I don't think that particular demographic is the one that's going to Hulu. But I put it up on the blog anyway, because the data is what it is, and I've learned, even though I've questioned it so many times, that the data is almost always right. Put it up there. We get a call from the CEO of Hulu. Your data's crap. Can't believe you guys published this. That's not our demographic. We know our demographic. That's not it. Right after that, the journal called, Wall Street Journal, and they were asking for my next column. And I'm kind of like, whatever's top of mind comes to me, so that was my next column. You actually look it up. The Wall Street Journal is Hulu, it's 55 plus. Who knew? Why did it happen is the most fascinating thing. So we could look at Hulu.com, as well as looking at demographics, we can look at clickstreams. So I can tell you where people came from, where they came to before they went to Hulu, where they went to afterwards. Where they came from that week of launch when I measured the demographic was from USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. They launched the way big companies launched. They paid a lot of money to get that front page story of the New York Times, the USA Today, Wall Street Journal. When people read that online, they went from the articles and they flooded onto Hulu.com. I looked at the age demographics of the journal, USA Today, New York Times, 55 plus, 55 plus. It might surprise you, like New York Times, 47% of their readers 55 plus online. USA Today, even higher, 51% as of this week. The journal, about 50%. A lot of these things people just don't realize in terms of the media, where people go to consume media, and what drives them to a specific site, and as a result, how you should do PR to get to your target demographic. I got one story that I'd love to share about disintermediation of media. But are there any media here? Bloggers, journalists? Okay. You can't write about this. This off the, I know, first rule of media training, nothing's off the record. This one, it's gotta be off the record. There's a reason, because there's family issues here. My mom, she's, I guess 74 when this particular incident happened. So I'm speaking at a conference in New York. It's a big search conference. And one of the things I love to do is put up the top search terms that people use to search, just the top terms overall. Number one term, www.facebook.com. Number two, facebook.com. Number three, Facebook. Number four, yahoo.com. Number five, www.yahoo.com. On down. Put this up in front of an audience of about 400 people. Guy raises his hand. People don't search that way. Something's wrong with your data. People do not go to Google and type in www.facebook.com into a Google search box. And I say, oh yes, they do. And my proof of this, I've been home to visit my mom, my dad, and I've seen my mom and what she does online. She opens up her browser, it's Explorer. MSN is her default portal. She's never changed it. She goes to the search box in MSN. She types in www.google.com to get to Google. And I said, Mom, you don't have to do that. You could just go to the URL bar here and type in www.google.com. She's like, no, I feel safe down here. This is where I want to be. And that's how she searches. Kind of an interesting side note. The 14th most popular search term on Google is actually www.google.com. So somebody had this theory that you could look at tuna casserole searches and that correlated really well with consumer confidence. And actually the person said tuna, and we came back after analyzing our data. I spent like 2 weeks on this. And found out it's actually tuna casserole was the key, not tuna. When the economy gets bad, people go to casserole. The other story around that is lipstick. So I had this this theory. Somebody, I think it was a Harvard Business School professor who I met with, was telling me about this lipstick theory. I wasn't aware of this. That when the economy's bad, lipstick sales go up. And this was a theory from, I think it was like 1950s. It's been around forever. So she wanted to know if I could actually prove that with our data. And the theory is that it's an affordable luxury. So when the economy's bad, women would like to treat themselves. They're not going to go out and buy something really expensive, like $500 pair of shoes. They'd rather just buy a really nice lipstick that costs a bit, but it's an affordable luxury. So I charted out searches on lipstick, and it went like this. It's just flat. It's just like a calm lake. And then 2008, September 2008, it just goes through the roof. And at this point, I'm writing for Time magazine. I got a weekly column in Time. And I write about the lipstick effect. I've got all this great stuff about how we've actually proved it using search term data. There's something called narrative fallacy, which is something you have to be really careful with big data, because when you have so much data, as much as I've got to play with, you can find data to back up any theory you want if you kind of turn a blind eye to everything else that's out there. And that's exactly what I did. I was so into proving this theory, I didn't check that next step. So my article was about to go to print when I decided to go and check a few things. And when I did variations on lipstick, for that particular period in September 2008, it was lipstick on a pig and lipstick on a pit bull. It was the exchange between Obama and Palin that was happening that drove. Had nothing to do with lipstick whatsoever. Just in the nick of time, I was able to pull that article back, change it. Rest is history. Yes, sir.
So what have you seen about sort of, I guess, the source of credibility on the web with content farms and media versus content farms versus bloggers, and more and more less authoritative sources of information becoming prominent? And then obviously Google then doing that update and getting rid of a lot of those better media as top search items. How do you feel like people assign credibility on the web for information?
That is a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that specific question. I do see that people consume that data, and based on what I see in search term data, I'm afraid that some people just believe almost anything that's out there. Especially when I study things like, you just look at Snopes and the search terms going to Snopes, you can see at least a little portion of the public out there is actually checking out some of these things that are out there that are truths. But if you look at the search terms in general, such a small portion actually go to that step of looking at a site to try to verify something.
My parents did, I have to send them these things.
Yeah, I do all the same thing. Same thing. So I don't really see people looking for credibility. Now, it may not appear in my data, so I can't say that they don't. And I think over time, people are going to start to do that. The subject of my next book, which is coming out in May or June of next year, is called Everyone's a Critic. And it's about online reviews, Yelp, TripAdvisor, Amazon reviews. And just studying that particular sector, I can tell you that consumers are becoming very, very savvy in reading other consumers' opinions, that a lot of businesses are so upset about some of these fake reviews, negative reviews. My research is showing that consumers are actually pretty adept at picking out what's real and what's not real and factoring that into the decision. So I think it is happening. I just don't see it in the data yet. Yes, sir?
Any thoughts on using like Google Trends data to measure basically the relative effectiveness of marketing and PR overall for a company?
Thank you for mentioning that. I was meaning to bring that up because the data set I have is actually very expensive to play with, but you can go and do this stuff right now with Google Trends. I think it's valid. It's not a perfect cross-section of the population, so it's not necessarily representative, but Google's got, depending on whose stats you use, between 70-72% of the US searches. So it's a pretty good slice. And it's good for the top line stuff. So just take the brands that you're working on, plug them into Google Trends, see what comes out. My new favorite tool that I've wasted so many hours on is Google Correlate. Has anyone used that tool yet? Oh, you gotta use this. I don't know the exact URL, it's not correlate.google.com, just Google Correlate, and you'll come up with this tool. You plug in any term and it'll go through, I think it's billions of terms at this point, and find those terms that correlate in time series. So I found these unbelievable, like,
Can you give us a for example? Give a for example.
It was a brand. I almost got fired from this engagement, I think, because of the correlation I found. But I think it was Schwab, and some sort of porn term showed up in the Google Correlate. But it's because that name Schwab, actually there was some site somewhere that had the same spelling. But it's a fascinating tool. So to find out what correlates with your particular brand can be incredibly eye-opening, because it'll show you those terms that aren't just straight variations of a term. It'll show you things that you'd never think of. But it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet in data and see that it's really not all that scary. Anyone can just kind of dive in and use trends and use Correlate to just find some top-line findings. And that's going to probably whet your appetite to do more with data. Yes, sir?
Back to the prom dresses, how did you get, or were you able to get the retailers and the publishers to kind of connect and make some progress there? I mean, were you able to get retailers to take action on that, become aware of it?
Yes.
Did they finally believe the data?
They did believe the data. We went back and we had, once I had heard that story from the guy at the OPA, from Herbst, we went back and we augmented all of our data. We knew what we were looking for at that point, and so we really did build it out. It was interesting that I then spoke in the UK, this is going back to like 2005, and my marketing manager in the UK heard about my obsession with prom dresses, and she said, please, please, in an English accent, don't talk about prom dresses here, we don't have prom. The only thing I could do at that point is start researching prom dresses in the UK. We found out it was like almost as popular as it was in the US. So we wrote about it there, and I spent my entire speech in front of like 500 people talking about prom in the UK. The next year, Wall Street Journal wrote a front page article about prom in the UK and how it had exploded. But yeah, when I find these things, we now put them on our blog. Our retailers read our blog. I Love Data is one of the places where we post some of these little nuggets. And they actually, now that we've got a track record of being right, they actually believe us. Like the Brony story, that we broke also about a year before the Journal. I don't know if you know what Brony's, males 18 to 24 primarily that are into My Little Pony. We actually saw that in our data a year before the Journal broke that story.
But just back to the prom dresses, because it is an obsession for you.
Yes.
When retailers could start actually, they knew they should probably start selling them in January. Did they do so, and did they sell them off?
No, they didn't start selling them in January, but they then knew after our data that that was the right time to get their brand in front of these consumers,
Yeah,
these
I
teenage
understand that,
girls.
but did they do it? And
Yeah.
did it change?
I don't know that any brands have come back to me and said our sales have lifted. I do know that they've changed their marketing campaigns to now be front and center to buy those terms in January versus waiting until March. But I haven't got confirmation back from anyone that actually has changed. Sales, I'm just going to have faith that it actually did. I do know someplace where it did change. Same analyst that discovered prom dresses discovered the engagement ring phenomenon. So we looked at searches for engagement rings, and the pattern is this. It's pretty flat. I insisted on doing this without slides, so now I'm actually like drawing things out. So pretty flat. Then February, there's a little bump in engagement ring searches. Then flat all the way to the week before Thanksgiving. Massive spike, 10x of the rest of the year. Right back down right before Thanksgiving, stays flat again. We don't understand this. Maybe it's just because it's right before Christmas, Black Friday, something to that effect is causing this massive spike. And we started calling retailers, and they said, no, the season is right after Thanksgiving, because most proposals happen on Christmas and New Year's, and that's when the guys are buying the rings. So my analyst looked at that, and she came up with the ultimatum theory. So her theory is, girl issues ultimatum before bringing guy home to meet the family, causes the massive spike in searches on engagement rings.